Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for those who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of your life. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. Have you ever dreamed of the day when you could hire a CEO who's capable of running your company and even growing it faster than you could? A day when you could literally hand over all of the responsibility and the stress that comes with the position and know that it's in good hands? Well, I do. To me, that is the ultimate victory when you've built a company and a brand and a team that can stand and grow on its own without your daily involvement. Well, today we have an opportunity to hear from one of those talented CEOs who is capable of just such a feat. David Kirchhoff took the helm of Weight Watchers as the CEO from 2007 to 2013. And in that final year alone, the company had over $1.7 billion in revenue and over 600 retail locations. And then in 2015, he fell in love with a little Austin food startup called Snap Kitchen. That happens to be a company that's been a big part of my life since they opened their doors a few years ago, along with all of my other fellow Austinites here in town who love them. Well, once again, under David's leadership, Snap Kitchen is growing rapidly, and the founder, Martin Burson, has actually taken a seat on the company board. He's stepped out of day-to-day operations and handed over the CEO role to David. And now Martin's turned his eye towards his next venture. He has the time and the availability to do that. So today's episode is all about how you can find a rock star CEO just like David to run and grow your business. We'll dive into the interview process, what's appropriate from a salary and an equity perspective, and you'll learn how to make sure that they're going to fit into your company culture and fulfill your vision. So if you are looking to grow big, this is absolutely an episode that you will not want to miss. So please help me welcome David Kirchhoff. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're joined by Dave Kirchhoff, who is the CEO of one of the fastest growing companies here in Austin, Texas, about to expand nationally. And it's called Snap Kitchen. For those of you who are based in Austin, and I know a lot of you are, you've probably become a loyal customer to Snap Kitchen and its revolution when it comes to food service. So, David, thank you so much for joining us here today. I've got so many questions to ask you as far as it comes to your background at Weight Watchers and what you guys are doing at Snap Kitchen, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you've had a hell of a career from my perspective as a CEO, and when it comes to growing small companies into large companies. And there's quite a few people who are listening to this podcast who have that as their primary goal. But if you could, take a couple of minutes to fill everybody in on your story, which I think is quite remarkable.
I don't know if it's remarkable, but I can absolutely tell you my story. Undergrad, I was an engineering student and decided that I didn't want to get a master's degree in biomedical engineering, so I found myself working for a small consulting firm, which then brought me up to Chicago, where I then enrolled at business school at the University of Chicago, went at night. Did pretty well and was fortunate enough to get offers at some kind of fancy consulting firms. So I worked for the Boston Consulting Group for about 4 years and change. Then was recruited in to help out one of my clients when I was at BCG, Tropicana, which had just been acquired by PepsiCo. Was doing that for just short of 2 years, and I had a unique and different opportunity, which was this company, Weight Watchers, which at the time was a subsidiary of Heinz, late 99, was acquired in a leveraged buyout. And the investors that purchased the business made the decision, a really smart group of guys from a place called the Invest Group. They made the decision to create a new co called WeightWatchers.com Inc. At the time, Weight Watchers had really nothing in terms of technology and nothing digital facing. So I was recruited in along with a few other people to basically sort of start the digital version of Weight Watchers from a standing start. And I was employee number 6 of that company. And the idea was to create a subscription-based product using web. This was obviously pre-iPhone. And we built a big web-based app that allowed you to keep track of your Weight Watchers program. And we made a bet that if we actually were able to help people lose weight, that they would pay for it, and they did. And so it was a good bet. The company did well. I eventually became CEO of WeightWatchers.com, which was an amazing opportunity. The company did well enough In 2005, about close to 6 years after launch, we were doing, better than 100 million revenue, really nice profit margins, 40% profit margins. And we were either going to go public as WeightWatchers.com or we were going to get acquired by the offline company, Weight Watchers International, which owned 20% of us. At that point, we pursued both avenues, but Weight Watchers ultimately came in and bought the business, and we became a fully owned subsidiary. And that was kind of interesting because at that point, Weight Watchers basically acquired what was at that point a 200-person, really software company that was doing this digital Weight Watchers product. And I stayed on as CEO of .com, started helping out with the international part of Weight Watchers business outside of North America, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand. And about a year after that, the board of directors asked me to become CEO of the public company. That was early 2007, and I did that for the better part of 7 years. And so it was a great run. It was 14 years of a company that I just love and admire to this day. I lost 40 pounds on the Weight Watchers program. It changed my life personally, professionally, everything else. The company, it's doing great right now. Everybody obviously knows all the news about Oprah and everything else. No, that had nothing to do with me. I was in the Jennifer Hudson days. But then after I left Weight Watchers, I decided that I kind of wanted to get back into more of a startup environment. I camped out in a motor lodge in Palo Alto after traveling for 6 months. I camped out in a motor lodge in Palo Alto for about 6 more months, going back and forth between there and New York. And then had an opportunity to help incubate a company in San Francisco, which is doing super well right now, called Helix, which was a joint venture between a company called Illumina and Warburg Pincus, Sutter Hill Ventures, and now Kleiner Perkins on the investor side. And it's creating a big consumer genetics marketplace. And those guys are off to the races. And I had the opportunity to join that company, but it was going to require a bicoastal commute. At the same time, I was introduced to Snap Kitchen in Austin, Texas, and quite frankly, I fell in love with it. And so I had the opportunity to come down here and help a company that was started by two amazing guys, Martin Burson and Brad Radoff, and work with them to basically begin the process of scaling Snap up. And so that's been going on for about 2 years. It's been a fantastic ride. It's been amazing. I think this company is really special and has some amazing opportunities in front of it. And it's been a real pleasure to be a part of it.
So for all of our listeners who are outside of Texas, can you give us the 2-minute summary of the concept behind Snap Kitchen?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've been in the healthy space for forever in a day, and I'd never seen Snap before or anything really quite like it, which was a place where it's I sometimes describe it as you imagine like if Whole Foods and 7-Eleven had a baby, it would look a lot like a Snap Kitchen, which are these kind of small 1,000-square-foot stores that sell nothing but really amazing tasting, craveable, but also super healthy, nutrient-dense, pre-made meals, heat and eat. So, the way to think about it is, at Snap Kitchen, we cook during the day. Everything's made from scratch. We cook during the day. We blast chills food, and then we pack it up. We deliver it in refrigerated trucks at night. It's on the shelf in the morning. And effectively, it's just sort of like, meals to go, just completely reimagined. And for me, what really distinguishes the concept is that it's very much food first, and a huge amount of effort is put into menu development. And then there's an equal amount of effort that's put into the way the meals are actually prepared, with a heavy emphasis on culinary execution. And at the same time, we also have this process when working on recipes where we basically take a chef and a nutritionist, we lock them in a room and make them fight until they come up with a recipe that is still amazingly craveable, but is also super good for you. So it's kind of a renovation process we put every recipe through. So you can actually have a big piece of lasagna, which tastes like an awesome piece of lasagna, but it's sort of weirdly healthy at the same time. And it's a really big idea because what it's doing is fundamentally breaking a compromise in the food landscape, that you should expect that you can have food that is food that you're really psyched to eat, and these great meals that are also super good for you and they're hyper convenient.
Yeah, that's my favorite part. I mean, living in Austin, there's quite a few locations. I live right downtown across from Whole Foods, so you guys are 2 blocks away from me.
Yep.
And I just head over there every other day, fill a basket up with 10 meals, which will see me through 2 or 3 days, and that's it. And I get fresh, healthy, non-frozen food that I don't have to prepare. And it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because the question I get asked the most frequently probably is Snap Kitchen like Blue Apron? And my answer is like, well, no, because we actually cook the meals.
Right. Yeah. Blue Apron is the opposite of you guys as far as convenience goes, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a ton of questions around this. First and foremost, how in the world, putting myself in Martin's shoes, right? The founder of Snap Kitchen, I've got my own company that I have big aspirations for. And at the moment, I'm continuing to do everything. And I'm like, how in the world do I find someone like you, right, who has your kind of experience level? And yeah, I guess that's the biggest question I have right now.
Well, I mean, first off, Martin is an incredibly gifted entrepreneur. And I'm still always amazed that, he invented this, like, along with Brad from scratch. And nothing like this had existed before. And he invented it because his wife, Robin, has food allergies and everything else, and they would always get frustrated that there was just no transparency, when they would go out to eat or try to get things at the grocery store and everything else. And so he had a real passion behind what they were doing. And, the guy took this business a long way in scaling it up. And so I was lucky to be brought into a company that was already highly functioning when I came on board. But, from Martin's perspective, he was looking to have the company, sort of expand all that much further. And as an entrepreneur, he had never been really around kind of scaling organizations. And so he was looking for a partner that could sort of help guide the company through that process. Now, at that point, Snap had, a terrific investor, which is a private equity firm out of Greenwich, Connecticut called Catterton, now called L. Catterton, because they merged with LVMH's private equity group. And the Catterton guys are super plugged in. They're invested in a bunch of Austin concepts, by the way, like Hopdoddy and places like that. They're an investor in Equinox, the fitness chain. Like, they've got an amazing portfolio of companies, and they do all consumer stuff. They're super plugged into the consumer world, if you will. And so they already knew me because I had gotten to know some of their partners, particularly some of the guys on the fitness side. And so they just kind of like helped make the connection. And then it was really up for me to forge a strong partnership with Martin and Brad as the co-founders.
So from a CEO's perspective, what is really important to you when it comes to growing and scaling a company successfully?
Yeah, and it depends where the company is, right? For better or for worse, the metaphor that I use along this topic is basketball. And no, I can't play for a damn, but I still like to watch it. And the thing about basketball is, like, as you're starting, you are a player, which to me is sort of analogous to being a founder and the CEO of a young startup, which is you're on the court, you're making shots, you're passing the ball, you're kind of making things happen sort of on the ground, and you actually have to be you're sort of a player coach, but really more of a player. And in the early days of a company, founders tend to have people around them who can sort of execute and do the things that the founder needs them to do. But it's a little bit more in its own way. It's often kind of command and control out of necessity. Because a company doesn't have the revenue base to support hiring people that frankly tend to be a little bit more expensive to bring on board. So you're just being sort of very scrappy in the way you do everything. At some point, the company gets to a size, and maybe a way of thinking about it is that when you have start getting to 50, 100 employees, or the revenue of the business is getting close to, say, 50 million, or however you want to think about it, you're now getting to that inflection point where you're ready to go from being startup to growth company. And it's a really critical inflection point. And at that point, the trick is to recognize that the nature of the business is starting to change and that the founder, the CEO, can no longer be the person making all the decisions and all the calls. And at that point, you really have to have a team of folks that can start effectively making decisions and making things happen on their own and are often running in front of you. And at that point, I go back to the basketball thing where I say, so now when the company gets to that place, you're no longer a player. You are a coach stroke GM and you're on the sidelines. And so, yeah, you're sort of helping set the overall strategy and you're providing leadership there. But really your job comes down to, do I have the right folks on the court? Are they playing well together? Do we have the right plays? And are they people that can call plays on the fly and make things happen? But you're not allowed to grab the ball and start shooting. You really have to stay in the sideline, otherwise you get a technical foul. So that's my way of thinking about, and it's that transition period can be really tricky for folks because you've been sort of like, and founders tend to be like, will run through walls to make things happen, and they like making decisions. And you really have to get to a point where you start you have a team that is actually making decisions, and you're more focused on making sure that the team is functioning.
Right, exactly. So, and just expand on that for just a little bit more right now, right? Like, so if you had to encapsulate the roles and responsibilities between yourself and Martin, how would you sum that up?
So at this point, Martin is he's on the board. I think he's actually trying to figure out his next startup. So I would say Martin is, establishing himself more as a serial entrepreneur. And I think he's figuring out what his next big invention is going to be. But, we still talk, regularly, and he's in the board meetings and everything else. And so and in my case, he fully wanted to hand the baton over and sort of go down that path. There's other startups where sometimes you'll see a founder go from being the CEO to the head of product. You might see a founder become, executive chairman. But I think what you're looking for is at some point when you do bring in a CEO, sometimes for better or for worse, called a hired gun, which I don't love that term, but it's not totally inaccurate. But when you bring in a CEO like myself, at some point the organization does need sort of a single point of leadership that they can look at and sort of know kind of where the buck ultimately stops. So having clarity around that, I do think, though, that with this kind of situation, like, it's just the thing that matters more than anything else is that the founder and the CEO just have a good relationship and a good dialogue, so that when people in the company and the organization feel like they're talking to one, they know that if they talk to the other, they're going to hear the same thing.
Right. Absolutely on the same page as far as the vision goes. This might be a question that's more appropriate for Martin, but if you have some insights on it, I'd really appreciate it. You guys have raised, you started in 2010. You've raised $150 million since then.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it was never $150 million.
Interesting.
That was something that was picked up by a local newspaper. That was a number that was sort of bandied, that they pulled off of a filing that had nothing to do with how much the company has raised.
Gotcha.
And it was an accounting thing. We since, shared with them what the issue was. They said, oops, sorry about that. But at that point, it had already gone out. The company has raised far less than that.
The heart of the issue is the decision to raise money or not, right? And it's something I've always tried to figure out because I've bootstrapped 2 8-figure companies over the last 10 years that have always been profitable and paid for themselves. And, I've got a big project that's going to be coming out in the next, quarter or two. And my goal is to build that into a $100 million business.
Yep.
And I'm always on the fence, and I get a lot of advice on whether or not you should raise money or not. And on one side, hey, keep all of the ownership and control that you can. There's no need to go into debt unless you need to. And on the other side, I've got advice from other entrepreneurs who are of the opinion that you can't afford it not to raise money because competition is so high these days. You need to move as fast as you possibly can to dominate your specific niche in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I just don't know what to do, right?
So I mean, I'll make the obvious point that there's obviously no single right answer to that question, and it really is specific to the company, its opportunity, and the nature of how it uses capital. In the case of Snap Kitchen, we're actually, as a company, we're investing in a lot of hard assets on the ground. So we're not a software company where we have a 90% gross margin product and no CapEx to speak of. We just turned on a 30,000 square foot state-of-the-art food production facility in Fort Worth, Texas, that has taken over for all of our other facilities in Texas because we had literally run out of manufacturing capacity because we're having a great year. That is real capital and real dollars. Every time we open up a new store, it's real capital and real dollars. And so if you have an aggressive growth plan, you just sort of, in that specific case, if you have an asset-intensive business, what you realize is that you could grow it like bootstrapping and sort of like growing it from the cash flow you generate. It would take you just a really long time to get to that inflection point where you are spinning out enough cash that you could fund all your capital requirements. That's a capital intensive business, and that's what Snap is. You're going to have other businesses where you might say, yeah, this is true. I mean, this is like the Facebooks and the Googles and everybody else in the early days. They wanted to hire a truckload of engineers before they had even turned on advertising. So for those guys, they said, the game was get to a massive audience, become indispensable, and then turn on your revenue engine. But to do that, you have to have funding to bridge you in the meantime, and that's obviously where VCs come in. I've seen plenty of other companies, such as the type that you're describing, where that's not necessary. It's not a land grab, and not every business requires a land grab. Sometimes you're better off having a sustainable business that generates a nice margin that you can grow. And as an entrepreneur, I'll make the obvious point. When you start bringing in money, you are making a decision. Number one, you're going to dilute your equity stake down quite a bit pretty fast. And you have to get your head wrapped around that and understand that it is what it is, because your early valuations when you're bringing money in is going to be such that that's what happens. Number two, as soon as you bring in outside money, you have to understand that you've now agreed to bring in investors who may not always have the same objectives and goals that you do in terms of, exit, liquidity event, the way you're using capital, whatever it may be. And because you agreed to sell them a stake, you have to accept the fact that they now have a seat at the table. In fact, in many cases, they have a controlling stake. And so they're effectively controlling the business at that point. And that may still be the right decision, but you just kind of have to understand the trade-offs you're making. And so in all cases, I would say it's really specifically about what is your strategy? How important is it for you to have a capital infusion that allows you to grow at some different pace, particularly for some strategic objective, like, being first mover, whatever it is. And is that really true? And then making a decision from that.
Would it be a good idea to bring on, let's say, a VC group that's really well matched for your business and your industry? They have a lot of experience in that area, even at a reasonable valuation and a smaller side of the equity pie, just to get access to their advisement, frankly, contacts, Rolodex, experience in your niche?
I'm more suspect of that. And the reason I say this is because the first thing about VCs is that typically they usually have a truckload of portfolio companies. So the question is, exactly how much of their time are you going to get? And it seems awesome because they, particularly when they're pitching you, like it just seems like they have these amazing resources and all these cool toys. And they do. But I don't know that I would let that drive my decision, because the other thing you can do, look, here you are in Austin, Texas, you're surrounded by entrepreneurs. They're like falling off of trees. There's business networks all over the place. There's lots of ways for you to access through your personal network and your business network a lot of that expertise. I mean, right off the bat, there's EO and YPO. And, I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs I've met who have learned how to manage and lead through their participation in those organizations. So there's a lot of different options for you to grab that don't require you to make the decision to bring in outside capital. My gut is typically to say, bring in outside capital because you need outside capital.
Got it. No, it's that makes a lot of sense. So if a company needs to hire a CEO, how does the founder know when he's found the right person?
It is a great question, and I haven't been on the opposite end of that. So it's a little bit less clear for me to speak to, other than to say generally, how do you know when you've hired the right person? What I would say, though, is that if you're a founder bringing on a CEO, the first thing you have to do is just sort of really soul search and say, are you really ready to bring on a CEO, recognizing that you're going to be handing over the reins? Because the kind of CEO you want to bring in is going to be the kind of person who is going to be as aggressive as you are, is going to want to sort of drive the heck out of the business, is not afraid to make a decision, is not afraid to lead. You want someone who is as personally strong as you are as an entrepreneur. And you really have to understand that if you get that person on board, that they have an expectation that they're going to be able to run. So the first thing you have to do is really get comfortable that you truly are good handing over the reins. And so when people come and ask you questions, you say, did you talk to Bob? Like, he's the CEO, you need to talk to him, or Jane, or whoever. And, so therefore, if you're going to do that, you really need to know, like, does this person share your values? Are they going to be as aggressive as you are? Are they going to make decisions? Are they going to do the right thing? Are they going to drive the business? And do you like them? And do you see yourself getting along with them? Because I've never heard of a situation between a founder and a CEO where you don't have to, like, it's a really important relationship, and every important relationship requires working through some rough patches as you get to know each other. Because then if you don't have a rough patch, I'd argue you're just being polite.
Right.
And you're not talking about real stuff if you agree on every single thing. So you really need to know that this is a person that you can build a really strong and lasting relationship with. Said differently, kind of look at them like you're getting a little bit married.
When it comes to compensation, in my mind, I kind of look at a CEO almost as a business partner, right? This is the individual, as you said, who's basically taken over day-to-day operations and is responsible for growing the business. From a generic perspective, if you were going to give me some advice on what I should expect from a compensation standpoint, are there any rules of thumbs or guidelines that you can provide? So is there a profit sharing aspect to it? Is there an equity aspect that's expected? What advice can you share with that?
There's almost always going to be an equity expectation.
Any kind of guidelines or bumpers that you can share as far as what to expect?
My guess is it depends on sort of how big the company is and how well developed it is. If you're talking about bringing someone into a company that's doing 50 million revenue and $10 million of EBITDA, I would guess that CEO would have an expectation that, they would get, like, I'll make something up, like call it 600 basis points or 6% of the company that you can make performance-based, by the way, achieving certain milestones that would lead them to an outcome that would be attractive and a good use of their time, particularly if you had a vision that the outcome or the exit you were looking for was 4 or 5 years down the road or however it is. If it's a company that's doing like $4 million in revenue and is losing money, then you're not going to be able to afford to pay that much in cash, and you're also asking them to take on a lot of business risk. Then they're going to have an expectation that the equity stake is going to be a bit higher than that. So you might be looking to something as high as 10 or 15% of the company. So I think it depends on where the evolution of the business is. And in all things, as an entrepreneur, the further you can go to the point that the company is sort of self-sustaining and profitable and growing really well and doesn't have a lot of risk anymore, that allows you to get a much more attractive valuation if you're bringing outside money, so you get diluted down a lot less. And it puts you in a position where you can afford to pay a CEO a little bit more in cash, give them a meaningful equity stake, but not give them quite so much. So it really depends on when you bring in your partner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you have any advice on how, young growing entrepreneurs could find that individual?
There's two ways to do it. Certainly through a network. Usually for CEO type folks, a lot of those people tend to be found via recruiters. And, and it depends on sort of how hot your company is, to be frank.
Right.
And potentially how high profile it is. And at this point, this is a place where if the company's super hot, like it is helpful to have like a name brand VC or private equity firm behind it, because it sort of adds to the quote unquote prestige, which can be really helpful for hiring, super high profile or sharp incoming CEO talent. And for those type companies, typically what you'll see is they're using an executive recruiter. And there are recruiters that specialize in startup companies, places like Diversa. And then there's recruiters that tend to focus on companies that are a little bit more kind of in growth or established mode. That might be like, probably the fancy of which would be like a Spencer Stewart or a Heidrick & Struggles or someone like that. That's typically for bigger companies and ones that are already sitting on a $500 million plus valuation. If it's much smaller, then I think you're going to be doing, my guess is that you're probably doing much more of a networking thing.
Gotcha. So, hitting LinkedIn and making phone calls, shooting emails out.
Well, it is yet another reason why I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to be kind of actively engaged in their local business network, as I'm sure you are in Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, the flip side of being the CEO is the buck stops with you, essentially. Y'all have just gone through, I'd assume, what is not an easy event here with the expansion of your facilities in Fort Worth and Dallas area and the layoffs that you've made here locally in Austin. I think if those headlines are accurate, around 100 people. So what was that decision like, and how do you handle doing something like that?
I mean, the headlines were a little bit misleading because they suggested that it was adverse business conditions that required us to do that, and that wasn't the case.
Right.
It was we ran out of meal capacity because we've had double-digit growth rates this year, and we knew that we were getting close, and so we had at one point right before we made this move, we had 2 small kitchens in Austin, 2 in Houston, 1 in Dallas, so 5 different facilities. We're having to sometimes bring food down from our kitchen up in Chicago. The whole thing was kind of a mess, all because we were out of capacity. And we also knew that ultimately it was going to be a much more efficient model with higher quality, more consistent food quality and really a significant step up in particularly food safety. For us to have a single state-of-the-art facility. And it made sense for us to do because, again, our MO is you cook during the day, you deliver to the stores at night, and they're on the shelf in the morning. And so it really doesn't matter if you're bringing in the meal from Fort Worth or Austin. It's the same thing. And so Austin now becomes where we're converting one of the kitchens to our innovation kitchen where we come up with the new recipes. We're going to continue using one of our kitchens in Houston to do some of our pastry and baked items, but our meal cooking all happens in Fort Worth. And so it was the right decision to make for the organization and for our customers. And so in that context, we knew that we had to do it. And, this is called leading a company, and is that you have to recognize that you have to do the things that are right for the long term of your organization and for your customer. And some of those things negatively impact lives. And that's never easy. It's by far the hardest part of the job, but it's your responsibility to do the right thing. And we went above and beyond in every way we possibly could, including giving opportunities to pay relocation for folks from the Austin or Houston kitchens that were willing to transfer to Fort Worth. And we did it as generously as we possibly could, but we knew that ultimately it was the right thing to do and we didn't have a choice. And at that point, you make the decision and you go.
How do you handle that personally? I mean, I don't know if you're too big for this now, but is this a situation where you pull these individuals into your office and have a face-to-face? Is it a phone call? What does that look like?
So in our case, so I have a partner at Snap. And it's really the two of us. And my partner is a guy named Dale Easton, who's our chief operating officer. And Dale runs all of the kitchens and is responsible for all production. And he's a very hands-on, passionate, emotional, lead from the front kind of guy. So Dale wanted the opportunity because this was his area. He went, to his credit, he went out, not to his office, but he went out to every individual kitchen and talked to people directly. And deliver the news himself. He felt that was very important and absolutely the right thing to do. I completely applaud him for it. And it went a long way because people, I think, really appreciated that he came out to, deliver the hard news directly.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've noticed over the last few years is I've never seen a single advertisement for Snap Kitchen. Maybe I've just missed them.
No. No, we do. We've done outdoor from time to time. Most of our advertising is digital. So we're doing a lot of social. So the other interesting thing about Snap is that, we effectively incubated a Series A technology company inside Snap. So these are, engineers and developers and UX, UI folks and product folks that we brought from kind of classic Austin startups. And they stood up I don't know if you use the Snap app, but we have the Snap Kitchen iOS app that we built from the ground up. It integrates with our point of sale. We've got front end guys, we've got back end guys, and now that's driving about 20% of our business is now flowing through website and app. And this is very different from what most food and beverage companies are doing, where they're using marketplaces like Uber Eats or Postmates or whatever. What we do instead is we partner with companies like Favor, for the most part, and a little bit Postmates, where they have a different product where we will hand off via API, and they do purely a delivery service for us. We do digital advertising that drives app downloads, and we do digital advertising in general. I've got an incredibly gifted CMO that we brought on about a year and a half ago, a woman named Tressie Lieberman, who was the VP of Digital for Taco Bell. And Tressie drives that. We're very focused on delivering great CAC. And frankly, interestingly, she and her team, they're now doing a lot of their own creative in terms of taglines and everything else. And they're super good at it, consistently doing better things. And frankly, a lot of times, some of these agencies we've worked with have done who have also been good in their own right. If you ask me, by far the most important thing that I've done since I've been at Snap, it's real simple. The most important thing I've done is to have the presence of mind to recruit a really strong, capable leadership team. These are guys that will be exactly the right set of folks to have when the business is 10 times its current size. And we're looking forward to the day when that's true. They are constantly running in front of me. My job, frankly, is spending most of my time trying to figure out what the heck they're doing. And that is the most important thing you can do once your company gets to a certain size is you want a team that just crushes it. And these guys crush it all day long.
That leads me to a question, which is, do I take on capital to, let's just say, hire the Snap exec team, right? A team of y'all's caliber. Do I take on capital to pay for that and to do that? Or do I use the free capital and the cash flow that I have right now to afford, a B string essentially, right?
Yep. Again, it's very specific to the company. It could be that, if you're a software company, you might say, in capital, it's do you need cash or is it equity? So, if you're a software company, you would say, if you're the founder, you're like, I need a rock star CTO and some really, super talented engineers. And they're going to have something of a cash expectation, but you might decide to go outsize on equity because it allows you to preserve cash, but the equity creates a massive incentive for them to really kill it. In terms of creating a cash overhang, I think it's always be careful of that in terms of sort of taking on so much G&A that you're then sort of stuck in a tough spot, because sometimes you'll be in a funding environment where they're happy to invest in companies that are generating losses. And there are going to be other times that funding environment, like right now, it's not the case. And you don't want to be caught in that position. And so you want to be judicious in the way you take on overhead so that it matches kind of where your revenue is. And then recognize that you may sort of dial it up or down depending on other events, either growth opportunities or funding opportunities or whatever it is. But I think that, your instincts, which is kind of that bootstrap mindset, it makes sense to carry that as long as you can until you feel like your decision-making process is literally getting gummed up because you can no longer keep track and you just don't have the team that you need and you can see how it's starting to hold back the company. That's usually the point when it's time for you to say, okay, I need to start investing kind of to get sort of that A-level talent that you need to help you get to that next place. But I think figuring out whether you're at that inflection point or not is kind of the trick.
Right. Absolutely. Well, gosh, this has been, my brain is just fried from all of the stuff I've been thinking about while you've been talking. We've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any really big pieces of advice, maybe some landmines that you've seen businesses and owners and CEOs run into on a regular basis that you could provide as maybe some words of warning or wisdom, if you will, when it comes to those specific challenges?
Yeah, I think the big advice I would get is just being thoughtful. The one I just made about being thoughtful about how you're taking on expense to basically secure talent, but then making sure that you have a really clear path to having a business model that becomes self-sustaining. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance in figuring that out, and it just requires a lot of constant thought to figure out if you're kind of getting in that place. Obviously, and you've seen this, I'm sure, in every single one of your startups, is the plan that you start with never bears any resemblance to the business you end up with in a lot of ways. It can, but usually not. And usually you find that, you're pivoting your business around because opportunities that seem like they might be the home run are not quite as big as you thought, but then something else pops up that's huge, and you need to be flexible in the way you think about your business and also your organization to recognize that, so I'll give you a good example of that in the case of Snap Kitchen. When the company started, it was simply open up stores, make sure you have meal production capacity to feed the stores, and that was the business. We're now finding more and more interest from partners, and it's a great opportunity for us to sell meals through other parties.
Starbucks, Whole Foods, yeah.
Yeah, like Whole Foods and retail, grocery, other places like that. And so, like, we're kind of becoming a little bit of sort of, part retail, part CPG. I mean, Snap is kind of turning into an omni-channel concept. And as such, you need to now ask yourself the question, like, do I have the right organization to support that business model? And it could be that you might say, better for me to focus on continuing to build out the omni-channel concept and get the whole new model working in favor of fast national expansion. And so you might say, and that's what we've been doing recently, which is we're spending a lot more time focusing on, building out the wholesale channel and really focusing on our home market of Texas. And we've pushed the pause button for the time being on new market openings because we want to perfect that business model. So, I mean, it's an exciting pivot for us, but it means sort of being constantly flexible for changing the way that you're thinking about rolling out your business and just staying open-minded and making sure your brain stays agile.
Last question for you. Do you guys have any competitors on the horizon who've seen what you've been doing, maybe on the East or West Coast and who are trying to knock you off?
You know what's interesting, and I hate saying it this way because it sounds like either cocky or short-sighted or blind. Not really. And what I mean by that is this is what's been interesting for us, particularly as we start focusing on the wholesale side of our business, is we haven't really found any other companies that are trying to do what we call basically it's small batch meal cooking, using from scratch recipes. Doing that at scale and doing that with super high standards on food safety, because this is a product that, it sits on our shelf for a couple days, potentially before you buy it, and it sits in your refrigerator for a few days. So, you really need to be locked down. And it's difficult to do. It's super process intensive, requires capital. We use really high quality ingredients. There's a lot of labor that goes into each dish. So like, getting to that sweet spot where you have this great tasting food, hugely high standards on food safety, and done efficiently is really difficult. And interestingly, that food production capability, and this, in my case, like every single day, I thank, whoever for the fact that I was able to convince Dale to join us as COO, because he really is sitting at he along with my CMO Tressie are sort of sitting at the heart of the business. Which is not to take anything away from the other really gifted leaders that we have. But what those guys are building is truly a unique capability and asset that it's now up to us to build off of. And that's not, by the way, what anybody thought when I joined the company 2 years ago, including me. Like, we didn't think that would be our defining point of differentiation. We even wondered, like, gosh, could we contract out to other parties? And what we found was that nobody was doing what we're doing. And so this has actually become our defining point of difference. And this gets back to my point, which is as an entrepreneur, you have to recognize and constantly ask the question about what is your business model? What really is your unique point of differentiation? And always ask that question over and over again, because you just never know sort of where your business is going to pivot to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's awesome. I wish you guys continued success. You're one of my favorite, local businesses here in Austin and have been for years. So I'm really grateful that you guys have been successful and, have dedicated yourselves to creating a quality product that is great for consumers, which is a rare thing these days. So thank you so much for that. So where can people go? Obviously Snap Kitchen is just local in Texas right now. There's going to be a lot of listeners who won't have the opportunity to experience the product yet. But where can they go to connect with you? Whether it's just on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Yeah, so my Twitter address is @dkirchhoff, KIRCHHOFF.
Awesome.
Nobody needs to go to my Instagram account to see my poor efforts at photography. And then obviously snapkitchen.com.
Very cool. Well, David, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your time today and for sharing your words of wisdom and experiences. This was really, really valuable. So I'm extremely grateful. And thank all of you for listening each and every week and for all of the reviews that you've given the show on iTunes. It's very much appreciated. And we'll see you next week. Take care.
Layoffs.